project, the RTC, the Nevada Department of Transportation, and the county engineer did recognize that there is significant congestion along USA Parkway, which is located in Story County. They also noted that substantial improvements would be needed in the future to address the impacts of the growing Tri-Center and the increased traffic that will occur when USA Parkway is extended next year down to Silver Springs. As a result, the county engineer is recommending a regional approach to exploring options for mitigating the existing and future traffic issues in that area. But in the meantime, NDOT is working on improvement projects that would mitigate some of those traffic issues during peak hours, and that may include modification of the highway off-ramp and access to the frontage road. Additionally, future development that does occur on the site may require traffic improvements at the time of review for those projects. So in order to be approved, the master plan amendment and regulatory zone amendment request must also be found in substantial compliance with the goals and policies of the master plan, including the East Truckee Canyon Area Plan. The proposal was evaluated against those goals and policies. It was found to be consistent. Details on those individual policies is starting on page 11 of your staff report. Next slide, please. In terms of development suitability of the project site, the southern portion of the property does contain some flood zone and floodway. Also, Article 222 of the Development Code does prohibit structures from being placed within 300 feet of the center line of the Truckee River. Both those constrained areas are part of the open space section on the property, in that 23 acres, and the remainder of the property is considered most suitable for development. So 30 separate property owners are required to be provided with notice for this hearing, and in order to get that many property owners, we actually had to go out 6.5 miles. You can see on the noticing map. Legal notice for this meeting was also published in the Reno Gazette-Journal's November 4th edition, and then the same property owners that were provided with notice for this hearing were also provided with notice for a neighborhood meeting that occurred July 14th, and we did not have any attendees at that meeting. The project was submitted to 22 local, state, and regional agencies for review. Comments were provided from the agencies that are shown on the screen. No recommendations for denial were received. And a minimum of 3 of the 5 findings from Article 820 that are shown on the screen must be made in order to recommend approval of the master plan amendment. Staff does believe that all 5 can be made, as discussed earlier in the presentation. Similar findings must be made to recommend approval of the regulatory zone amendment findings. To recommend approval of the regulatory zone amendment, those findings are shown on the screen as well. And then based on the information that was presented in the staff report, staff does believe the required findings can be made and recommends that the Planning Commission follow the 4 actions that are shown on the screen, including approving a resolution adopting the amendment to the East Truckee Canyon Master Plan map, also to the regulatory zone map, directing staff to forward these resolutions to the BCC and authorizing the chair to sign the resolutions. If you agree with those recommendations, a possible motion for the master plan amendment is shown on the screen. I do want to point out that this is slightly different than the one that's on page 20 of your staff report. This does reference all 5 findings. And then on the following screen, we have a possible motion for the regulatory zone amendment. That's also on page 20 of the staff report. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. The applicant is available, as well as our Division Director of Engineering and Capital Projects, Dwayne Smith, who's available to answer any questions that you might have specifically on traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Any questions for Kelly? Yes, Francine?
Yes, Kelly, just a quick one. I know that part of this is in the floodplain, and that's where it's the open space. But there was on here on exhibit D1 in our report, it said the site plan map showing the floodplain is inaccurate to the FEMA floodplain maps, and that so much of the property is FEMA flood zone. AE master plan answers the question, therefore it's inaccurate. And then it says that development that is proposed in the FEMA floodplain will require a CLOMAR and LOMAR approved by FEMA. So what we're doing is just changing the zoning, and then when they go forward, they will have to submit this for whatever they do, is that correct?
The delineation of that open space area was finalized after we received that notification from our engineering staff. So what you see on that, the open space portion on the maps that you've received, that reflects accurate flood zone boundaries. So there would be no development within that area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Any other questions? Yes, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kelly. Just as, I know we're just doing a master plan amendment this evening, but there is reference in Exhibit D10 with making recommendations to ensure best management practices, because that's flowing into the Truckee. So as this project moves forward, I do hope that we see that those BMPs will be managed.
Absolutely, and Article 222 of our development code does speak specifically to all development that occurs within a mile of the Truckee River, and so there would be additional requirements. A water quality report would have to be provided to the county as well, showing that there would be no net increase or negative impact on the Truckee River's water quality.
And then the other one was Regional Parks and Open Space asked for trail easement.
And that was a request that was made. Certainly, we cannot condition a
Right.
master plan or regulatory zone amendment, but that request was passed along to the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Kelly? All right, thank you, Kelly. Is there an applicant presentation? Yes.
Good evening, Derek Wilson with Rubicon Design Group. Kelly did a good job, so I'll try to keep this brief. The goal here is to allow for a business to operate on site that provides construction equipment to the Tri-Center and to the USA Parkway construction. So I think that's a very logical place to put it. We have road access already. We're close to a freeway off-ramp. So I think in that regard, it's extremely logical. Additionally, we'd be bringing, with the industrial zoning we're requesting, we'd be bringing the zoning into conformance with the historic use of the property. It's been a gravel pit and a equipment yard, a trucking center. So I think we're sort of acknowledging reality in that regard. As far as the open space, when we started this project, my understanding was that the sensitive river areas had already been acquired by a public conservation group. But county staff felt that some additional open space was warranted to further protect some of the areas of our site, which are in fact extremely wet. So even, they're not always natural slopes, so they've been excavated, but nonetheless, they're now wetland and flood areas. So to me, that it's a no-brainer to make that open space. That's no problem. We can use, the site is generously sized enough that we could install the proposed business without encroaching on any of those areas. We don't need it. It's a large site. So we're in full agreement with Kelly's presentation, and I'd be happy to elaborate if people had more questions. Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Wilson? Yes, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, just a comment, just if you could pass on to the property owner the appreciation for maintaining open space along a sensitive river. Thank you very much.
We like protecting the river. Have no problem with that.
Any questions for Mr. Wilson? Okay, thank you. All right, then, Donna, do we have any public comment?
We have no requests.
Okay, thank you. Then I would bring it back and ask if the commissioners have any questions of staff, applicant, or members of the public. Okay, then I go ahead and close the public hearing and call for discussion. Commissioners like to discuss this somewhat? Okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, then I call for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that after giving reason, hey, do we do the
We do both.
regulatory zone amendment and the,
Separate.
Separate ones.
we have to do them separately?
Right.
Okay, all right. So this would be a motion for MPA 16-001. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Planning Commission adopt Master Plan Amendment Case Number MPA 16-001, having made the following findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110, 820.15D. I further move to certify the resolution and the proposed master plan amendment of MPA 16-001 as set forth in the staff report for submission to Washoe County Board of Commissioners, and authorize the chair to sign the resolution included as Exhibit A for this matter on behalf of the Planning Commission.
I second.
Okay, we have a
Mr.
motion.
Chair, and for clarification,
Yes, Mr. Webb?
Excuse me, and for clarification, that included all 5 findings, correct?
Yes.
there's only three.
But again, as Ms. Mullen noted in her presentation, on the screen sheet showed a revised motion that included all 5 findings as outlined in the staff report.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, to include the 5 findings.
Okay, and does the seconder agree?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion by Larry, a second by Francine. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, then I would call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, then that carries unanimously. Would someone like to make a motion on the second item?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion for RZA 16-002. I move that after giving reasons and consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Planning Commission recommend adoption of regulatory zone amendment case number RZA 16-002 to the Washoe County Board of Commissioners, having made all of the following findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.821.15D. I further move to certify the resolution and the proposed regulatory zone amendment RZA 16-002 as set forth in the staff report for submission to the Washoe County Board of Commissioners, and authorize the chair to sign the resolution included as Exhibit B for this matter on behalf of the Planning Commission.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Larry, a second by Francine. And is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, then I would go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll go to item 7B, Regulatory Zone Amendment Case Number RZA 16-005, Marengo Road. And I would ask Mr. Webb to identify the general nature of the proceeding.
This is a hearing, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval of an amendment to the South Valley's regulatory zone map, changing the regulatory zone from low-density rural to medium-density rural and general rural on 3 adjacent parcels totaling 40.12 acres in size. The proposed amendment will establish 34.86 acres of medium-density rural and 5.26 acres of general rural, and Trevor Lloyd is the staff planner.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Disclosures by commissioners, ethics, or ex parte communications? Okay, seeing none, I'd go ahead and open the public hearing, and I'd ask for the staff presentation. Mr. Trevor Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm Trevor Lloyd with Washoe County Planning and Development. As Bob indicated, the following is a request for a regulatory zone amendment on 3 parcels that are currently zoned low-density rural, and the request is to amend that regulatory zone to a combination of medium-density rural and general rural. Next slide. The subject property is located south of Marengo Road, about 3,000 feet from the intersection of Toll Road and Ravaza Road. As I had indicated, the request, the properties are currently low-density rural, which has a designation of 1 dwelling unit per 10 acres. The applicants are asking to intensify the zoning for a regulatory zone of medium-density rural, which allows 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, except where there is relatively steep slopes. Those areas will remain general rural. Next slide, please. This crazy map on the overhead is the slope analysis map. It shows those areas that, essentially in bright red, shows those areas that exceed 30%. The applicant has provided a revised map. Originally, they came in and requested the entire site be medium-density rural. It was revised after discussions with staff to remove those areas over 30%, from the MDR request to a general rural request. Next slide. The slide on the overhead shows the surrounding properties and does a good job of identifying these properties and the compatibility with the neighboring properties. What you'll find is that the request to MDR provides for a decent transition from the higher density to the west and northwest to the lower densities to the south and to the east of the properties. This request is still in keeping with the rural designation or the rural master plan designation and is compatible with these surrounding uses. Again, the minimum lot size will still be 5 acres, which is very consistent with most of the surrounding lots. Next slide. Having discussions with the school district and other reviewing agencies, the request will have very minimal impacts, starting with school districts. It's anticipated that at most, this new density would generate 1 student for high school, 1 student for middle school, 1 student for elementary school. In fact, according to the staff school planner, it would likely be closer to about half a student each, but they typically round up in these situations. Next slide. Similarly, the impacts will be very minimal to the traffic in the area. Clearly, not a need for intensification or expanding of any roads at all. Again, very minimal increase in traffic. Next slide. This item was presented to the South Truckee Meadows Washoe Valley Citizen Advisory Board at their August 11th meeting. The board recommended unanimously to approve the request. There were a couple of concerns, increased traffic, potential impact to wildlife, and whether or not it's consistent with the character of the area. Many of those can be addressed with the future proposal for developing or dividing the property. Again, we cannot condition a regulatory zone amendment, so we will condition that those issues will be addressed with future development. Next slide. This property was legally noticed. It met all the requirements for noticing. One thing I didn't mention, we did send this out to a number of reviewing agencies. We did get some comments back, but really no comments, no detrimental comments to the proposed request. Next slide. The request meets all of the required findings, particularly that the request is in substantial compliance with the area plan and master plan, that it provides for land uses that are compatible with existing surrounding uses, that it responds to changed conditions such that there's been a number of new development in the area, that there's adequate services and facilities, given that it is still a rural designation with future rural development proposed. It will not adversely impact the implementation of the policies and the goals of the master plan, and that it will promote the desired pattern for the orderly physical growth of the county. Staff analyzed this in comparison with the area plan policies, and specifically with the character statement of the area plan and the Steamboat Rural Valley character management area, and found that it was certainly consistent with that character statement. Next slide. That concludes staff's presentation. We offer the following motion for your consideration, and I can answer any questions that you have at this time. The applicant is also available. He's in the room and can answer your questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Do we have any questions for Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Pro?
Evening, Trevor. I think in its simplest form, we're just simply changing this from 10 acres to 5 acres for a dwelling, basically. That's it. Is that true? Is that correct?
The best way to describe this is, again, there's 3 lots currently with the potential right now for three homes, 3 units. The intensification will allow for a maximum of 7 lots throughout that 40 acres.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Chesley.
Trevor, good evening. If you look at the slide that had the slopes on it, These 5-acre parcels, it appears to me, there's not a lot of this that isn't hilly. And is there any possibility these 5 acres of parcels are gonna end up pretty well clustered?
That is a possibility, probably not likely. Again, I think what you will find is that there are large developable areas that will be available for each 5-acre lot that's created. I don't know that they necessarily want clustering, or even that the county necessarily wants to necessarily see clustering at this location. It's more of a rural designation surrounded by rural lots. It would probably be out of character if they were to cluster this.
And that would be addressed on down the line when
Yes.
the applicant
Yeah.
makes. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Lloyd? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Appreciate it. Does the applicant care to make a presentation?
Only in response to if someone else wanted to talk.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't we see what happens then if you don't want to make one at this point, okay? Donna, do we have any public comment?
We have Randy Sewell, followed by Michelle Spencer.
Mr. Sewell, would you come forward, please?
Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Anyhow, my name is Randy Soule. Excuse me, I am the property owner of the 40 acres to the north of this development. And the second person you're going to hear talking here tonight is the 40 acres to the south of this development. These are 40-acre parcels that we own. This parcel in question, or brought up here tonight with you, was a 40-acre parcel 15 years ago. And the previous owners at that time wanted an access easement through my property to their 40-acre parcel, which is what you're talking about here tonight, and that was granted to them. They then went ahead and subdivided that property into 3 13-acre parcels, which you see there right now. When they did that, they sought to obtain further access easements so that they could then have access to all 3 of those new parcel numbers. That was denied at that time. So they turned around and paid over $100,000 to Majestic View Estates, which is here, here, and here. And they obtained their 3 access easements into those 3 13-acre parcels. Because these 2 40-acre parcels, mine to the north and the other one to the south, are cattle ranches. They are developed as ranches. We have cattle on those ranches. And as soon as you start adding more density in here, now if they want to access it through Marengo Road, that wasn't going to work. So the developer in here tonight, he holds access easements that were purchased by the previous owner of over $100,000 that was paid for access through Majestic View Estates. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But he's now proposing that he wants his old previous access to the 40 acres to be enacted so he can utilize that access, which is no longer valid. They never did develop it. They never developed the road. He now wants to enact that so that he can access the further increased density that he wants to make it. I have already told him I'm not in favor of that at all, nor do I believe you commissioners should be in favor of that either, because it's going to create nothing but a problem. And I'll be the first to tell you there's going to be injunctions filed because there is no easements through Marengo Road that are valid right now that go through my property. And Mr. Lloyd, I don't know whether or not he's researched these easements. I don't know whether he's researched how long ago they were written and what the current easements are, but I would at least like to make sure that you are putting some sort of a caveat on this that is requiring that these easements be appropriate for these properties. So that's my main point to you, and sorry I went over time here. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Soule. Okay, Donna, do we have, you said we had another, what was the name of the next person?
Michelle Spencer.
Michelle Spencer, would you come forward, please? Yes, right. Would you state your name and address, please?
Sure. Michelle Spencer. My address is actually in Sparks, which is unaffected. I'm talking about 120 acres actually to the south of him, and it has been a cattle ranch and been in my family for 150 years. So, and you are talking about severe impact on the wildlife, which is what I talked about before. And when you start talking 7 homes in 34 acres, and there are slopes, trust me, every which way you go up there are slopes. You are going to talk about houses being very on top of each other. So the other thing that that we're concerned about is we have yet to see any of the planned community, like what it would even begin to look like. So we have concerns about what that would even look like. So, but I don't know that that's what you bring forward at these meetings. So yeah, we're just more concerned about the impact it will have on the area. So I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Spencer. Do we have any other requests to speak?
No further requests.
Okay. Then, at this point, I'd ask for commission questions, and this can be directed at staff, applicant, or members of the public.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Chesney.
For Ms. Spencer?
Could you come up again, Ms. Spencer?
Just for my information, could you point on the map there where your 120-acre parcel is? In relationship?
These are the 3, and this is, if this is Randy's, then ours has got to be behind there.
Oh, you're behind it.
Yeah, like we have an easement, we do have an easement through Randy's, but we're one family. We're one cattle ranch family, and we have an easement not only through Randy's, but through those 3 parcels to our property, because we are landlocked behind both.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Crowe.
For Michelle, please. Thank you. You made a statement that you're concerned about an impact on the wildlife. Could you be more specific with that?
So actually, there's wild horses all over up there, which, is not really the concern that I have. But they do roam right through the middle of that property because everything else around there is fenced. But you also have, we actually do studies with UNR with Professor Gray, and she does all kinds of studies on, there's bear, there's mountain lion, there's deer, there's skunk, there's bobcat, there's all of that kind of wildlife that's up there. So what kind of impact are people driving through there all the time going to have on that?
But we're talking about 7 homes, not 70.
That, yes, but 7 homes, and it's hard to tell on that map, but trust you me, those homes are going to be on top of each other, and then depending on the access that they have, if it's through Majestic View, my understanding through that association is they can only have 3 homes through that. Only 3 people can access through there.
Okay.
And if that's okay, then that's fine, but if it's going to suddenly be 7, that changes things drastically.
Okay, thank you. Question for Mr. Lloyd.
Yes, Mr. Lloyd.
Trevor, is this all considered open range land surrounding there that would necessarily need real estate disclosures and things like that on any purchases or any construction?
Legally, I'm not aware of any disclosures that are required. Now, that property immediately to the east is open space. It's designated open space. It's federally owned. And so there certainly will be wildlife to the east. But I'm not aware of any legal disclosure statements to such.
For specifically open range?
Right, no.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, any other commission questions?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just, sometimes when it's multiple steps in process, what we're hearing tonight is a regulatory zone amendment. So there is no plan for development, there's no plan, that will come back before us when it's proposed, and then that's when it can be conditioned. So we hear it in process, so I encourage the community to continue to do due diligence and stay on top of it, but it can get to be a convoluted process, but it is a process.
Okay, any other questions? All right, then we'll close the public hearing, and I'd call for discussion. Do the commissioners have any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Pro.
I just want to thank Commissioner Savilicek for clarifying the point that we're simply doing this as a RZA, yeah, for
Right.
staff. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, then I would go ahead and call for a motion. Anyone like to make a motion?
I will, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Pro?
Thank you. This is for regulatory zone amendment case number RZA 16-005. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Planning Commission recommends adoption of the proposed regulatory zone amendment map as identified as Exhibit A to the resolution, having made all of the following findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.821.15. I further move to certify the resolution and the proposed regulatory zone amendment in RZA 16-005 is set forth in this staff report for submission to Washoe County Board of Commissioners, and authorize the chair to sign the resolution on behalf of the Planning Commission, having made all 6 findings.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Greg and a second by Francine. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, then I would call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have chair and commission items, future agenda items. Anyone like any future agenda items?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Pro.
can we have a Christmas party at your house?
If you buy the liquor, yes.
He hasn't got that much money.
Okay, any other?
I'll withdraw that.
Okay, any other future agenda items? Okay, request for information from staff. Anyone have request for information from staff? Okay, seeing none, then we go to directors and legal counsel's items. Mr. Webb, report on previous planning commission items.
Following up on a couple items that came from the last planning commission meeting, and again, I apologize for not being here, so I have these from the director. They were specifically requests that we had for information that I'm following up on. Commissioner Savilicek knows about this one because there was an email exchange earlier, but for the rest of the commission, one of the requests had to do with approved unbuilt projects in an area in the context of some evaluation or context of cumulative impacts for tentative subdivision maps as they come in. What will be on your December Planning Commission agenda is a very short presentation by the director, who will present 2 series of maps. The first map is an overall county map showing all of the approved unbuilt projects in the unincorporated county that we're aware of, because we approved them. And then there'll be a second map that will be area-specific for the tentative subdivision maps that you're going to see in December. And thereafter, each tentative subdivision map request that comes to the commission will contain what I call the zoomed-in map. In other words, the area showing the approved unbuilts in that area, so at least you can have a gauge of cumulative impacts. The second matter, and I'm going to ask if I can get either Donna or Kathy to pass these out. This was a request for some information from the school district on various matters. Director Whitney had requested Mike Boster with the school district to provide some responses. He did so. So this is a memo to you, and we have some for the public if they wish. Being serious. Anyway, so the memo is for you in answer to those questions. I would ask if you could peruse this at your leisure. If you have further questions, to get in touch with either myself or Director Whitney, and we'll direct those questions to the school district. We're actually hoping, by the way, that this will suffice in lieu of a presentation, but if it turns out that you feel that you need a presentation, we can certainly discuss that at the December meeting. And finally, remember that our December meeting will be here, and it will be starting at 6:30.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Mr. Edwards, do you have any legal information and updates?
The election, as you know, just concluded, and recreational marijuana was passed in the state. The process for addressing that is underway internally in terms of code provisions and state regulations, and so there's a whole cascading process from the top down about how that's going to unfold. obviously you can't have a discussion about this tonight or anything like that, but there may in the future be development code amendment items coming forward at some point. And I don't mean to get you too riled up. It's not something that's going to happen, next month or anything like that, but it's on the horizon. So that's the only update that I have for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Edwards. Then, Donna, I'd ask if there's any general public comment? Okay, all right. Then if there's nothing else, I'd
Mr.
entertain.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Chesney?
Bob, is there any progress on the presentation by Tumwa and the discharge authority?
In response to Commissioner Chesney, yes. We have scheduled actually as the first item on the December agenda, a presentation on, by the Water Resources, the Regional Water Planning Commission staff member on water resources in the region. He's assured me, knock on wood, that he'll have a Tumwa representative, there, and also our local water resource expert, Fahid Behram, as a part of that presentation available for questions.
Great, thank you very much. Great, that's great. Okay, anything else before we go to adjournment? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair?
I make a
move we
motion.
adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion by Larry, a second by Mr. Pro. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Yeah, we're adjourned.